essentially give them the ability to react. And there was a study on the last blackout that showed that if we had these type of systems in place, they would have actually had advanced warning up to an hour or two ahead of time that would enable people to do something to prevent the blackout. And so what we're really trying to do with this project is to build that infrastructure out in New York State and bring that kind of information back to our control center for more reliability. It also includes installation of capacitors to improve the control and coordination of voltage on the system as well. Some of the issues and challenges around smart grid cybersecurity. The mission, and this goes back to the DOE's oversight of the project, and what they're really calling for us to do and asking us to do with this project is to enable resilient next generation smart grid capabilities. So we're recognizing that there's new engineering approaches that we're going to have to adopt on this project. There's a lot more integrated organizational cooperation. Our organizations tend to have a lot of experience working within our own companies, but here we really need to cooperate with the transmission owners and other organizations outside our control area to bring this information back and to secure it and to work through all those kind of issues. It'll require new strategic and tactical methods. A lot of new technologies. We're looking at different ways. What we're looking at is much more information coming back in real time, so it's a lot more data to manage. Upgrades to the technologies behind our network infrastructure to be able to accommodate that. Our storage infrastructure, how are we going to maintain and store all this data, and then how do you get it all back to a human being to be able to do something intelligent with this information. There's certainly a diligence in meeting regulatory and compliance requirements. That's certainly a concern throughout all this. Being part of the Smart Grid Investment Grant program means that there's also strings attached with that money. There needs to be accountability for all the dollars that we spend, and transparency and visibility to what we're doing. So that's certainly part of it. One of the other concerns that comes up is, as a critical infrastructure facility, there are certain security regulations around that actually can carry fines with it. And so how does Smart Grid play into that? And how do you deal with that aspect of things is certainly a big challenge for us to work through. And then at the end of the day, really what we want to be able to do is foster some public trust that security is a high priority. We get a lot of bad press in the energy industry about cybersecurity, and having responsibility for that security group. We cringe every day when one of those articles comes out. It's really up to us with this smart grid projects to kind of build security in right from the beginning and hopefully change some of those public perceptions.
Okay, our next speaker is Professor Robert Haverly. His research and teaching interests span property and land use law, intellectual property and copyright law, and cyberspace and communications law. Most recently, a visiting professor of law at Michigan State University College of Law. He was previously lecturer in law and director of the LLM program in information technology and intellectual property at the Norwich Law School of the University of East Anglia in Norwich, England, and fellow with the Information Society Project at Yale Law School, where he retains an affiliation as a faculty fellow. From 1992 to 2001, he served as assistant director of Albany Law School's Government Law Center. He received his BA from the State University of New York at Oswego, his JD from Albany Law School, and his LLM from Yale Law School. Robert.
Thanks everybody for coming, for inviting me to join you today. I'm going to do something a little bit different maybe, because I was asked to come and talk not just about purely cybersecurity, but about how cyber law touches on cybersecurity and the grid. And I'm going to start that by saying there is no such thing as cyber law. It's just this thing that we've made up. to group together how the various areas of law actually touch on the notion of things technological and informational and network. And so while it's convenient to consider the categories, keep in mind that they're always arbitrary, and something can come from outside, out in left field, and hit you, and something that you think at the core might not actually be at the core. So I want you to consider that as we go forward. Part of this broad overview that I'll provide will look at smart grid technology and the responsibility for the information, both the information that makes the system run, or the internal information, and the information that it then generates that becomes external and that people might want to do something with, and so responsibilities there and how law touches on that. I'll start with something that's called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act under federal law, and this is a law, 18 U.S.C. section 1030. I'm a law professor, I have to cite statutes that sort of require it as part of my genetic code, I think. This section of the law makes it a crime, and there's an attendant civil penalty or civil cause of action for somebody to, without permission, access and do something with a computer. Don't ever tell anybody else that a law professor was that sort of loosey-goosey with what the statute actually means. It's been interpreted a number of times in very narrow ways, but essentially gaining access to a system, and either harming the system or doing something unauthorized with the system, destroying information, releasing information, etc. So that's one of the federal statutes that might come in, aside from all of the stuff related to, say, DOE, critical infrastructure, cybersecurity mandates that come from either funders or government. All of this stuff is additional stuff that people that are attached to the cyber aspects of the smart grid might run into. In addition to the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and you can have civil liability in a civil lawsuit from someone for having somebody access your system, or by accessing the system without authorization. We have the Electronic Communications Privacy Act and the Stored Communications Act, which are in 18 U.S.C. U.S.C. stands for United States Code, so that's just the federal law. The notion of these are that you are not supposed to listen in on communications that you're not authorized to listen into. And the Stored Communications Act was added to the Electronic Communications Privacy Act primarily because of changes in the way the communication took place. Stuff gets stored for a little while. If I send you an email and it sits on your email server, is it in communication, or is it now stored so that the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act would apply? So the Stored Communications Act was added to it. It hasn't really given us a lot of clarity. Courts aren't really certain what a stored communication is and when it's no longer a communication. We're working through those, and I think there are actually some elements of the smart grid that will bring this forward as we talk about communication across the network back and forth and control. I'll leave those to questions and answers. What other sorts of issues might you get? Privacy. This is a huge concern for consumers. And unfortunately, much like cyber law, there is no right of privacy in the United States. It's not guaranteed in the Constitution. You won't find the word there. It comes under what the Supreme Court justices have called the penumbra of rights protection under the Constitution and the amendments. That means it's not there, but we pretend that it is, basing it on some language out of various elements. That said, there are federal privacy laws. And some of these comes from places that, again, might be left field if you're thinking about the electrical grid and smart grids. And I'm talking about, for example, the Federal Trade Commission, which might have a regulation about how a smart grid operator, or maybe not the operator, but somebody who's connected in and integrated in for use of that information, what they then do with the information they've gathered. That might flow from whether consumers have actually allowed or opted in to the use of the information, and what information they were given ahead of time. So privacy coming not from electrical, probably not even from cybersecurity elements, might be a key ingredient to what happens with the grid. In addition, there are just standard legal concepts. One is contract. Many times when you have a contract, you can write your liability out. Many times you try to do that and you don't succeed. What happens when a hacker gets in and gets all the data on the customers and then releases that on WikiLeaks? And so you can now go on WikiLeaks and look and see when your neighbor wakes up in the morning and what kind of coffee machine they have, because it's all connected and reporting in. That might be governed by contract. There might be an attempt to exclude it. It may or may not succeed. But as likely as not, the contract and the contractual relationship between a provider of a service and the consumer of that service may lead to liability beyond that which might otherwise exist in the next area, which is negligence law, and the notion that you have to act with a duty of care toward others. You're not supposed to do things that injure others or allow for injury to others. Negligence law, how does it apply? Let's say that you have a smart grid system, someone invades that system or somehow compromises it and shuts down the electricity, or causes all of the cars that are being charged to no longer charge, so that when everybody gets up in the morning, all of their electrical car batteries are dead, no one can go to work. Are you liable for that under a negligence standard? I actually don't know the answer to that question. Part of the reason we don't know is because of the complexities of the relationships. Tort law, which negligence is a part of, is based on relationships. And as our relationships expand pretty much worldwide, you can email people in China and India and Saudi Arabia and South America. Our notion of what it means to be connected to somebody changes, and we don't know exactly what those relationships are. This scenario that I've just outlined might just be taken away under rate regulation. It might be written into the rules. So many utilities aren't responsible when the power goes out, so long as they weren't grossly negligent. That's not a typical legal construct. That comes from the relationship that they have with the regulator. And again, this makes everything very complicated in terms of potential liability. So what is my answer then? What is the conclusion that I would give to you as the law professor standing here in terms of legal liability flowing from cybersecurity and information protection in the smart grid? Hire a lawyer. Thank you very much.